because life is in the womb, because we cannot see it, it seems to be invisible and it seems not to matter. But when we actually think about it more carefully, this is life at its most vulnerable state. And if we devalue that, what we've done is she has devalued every other one of her children as well. Right? And that's how I would at least begin a conversation. That's probably a little heavy-handed, so I'll have to figure out and talk to the person to figure out where they stand. But I think those two arguments can be fairly potent.
Judy? Hold on.
Yes, this goes back a little bit to what you were saying. I just was wondering, and I haven't heard anything about it in a long time, if that most horrendous of procedures called the partial birth abortion, what the status of it is now. Because way back, even when Bush was running for office, that was part of his platform. He was going to do away with that somehow. And then he got kind of sidetracked with the war and with 9/11 and everything. And I don't think anything really came of it. But it's been so many years, and you really don't hear about it much anymore. I was hoping that they finally did away with it, because I read at the time an account of a nurse that worked in the operating room during that time when one of those procedures was being done. And if anybody ever read what actually happens, I mean, you can't get it out of your head. I mean, you can cry a zillion tears and you can't do anything. So I was hoping, since you don't really hear about it much anymore, maybe they've done away with it. That's my question.
Yes, I can address that. First of all, you should know that anywhere in this country, for any reason, a woman can have an abortion up until the day of birth. There are restrictions. Partial birth abortion is illegal. For anyone that doesn't understand what that is partial birth abortion is up until the 9th month. The baby is forced into a breech position and everything is delivered but the head. And I'm sorry for telling you this, but the physician will stick scissors or something into the base of the skull and kill the baby's brain and suck the brains out. And it was legal. And it was invented by someone that lives right here, or actually has his office, owns a building right here in the Akron, Ohio area. He happens to own the building where the Akron abortion clinic is right now. And he has a very messy abortion clinic down in the Dayton area, I believe it is. He just had one closed in Cincinnati. It's very messy, but you don't need to have an excuse to have an abortion, and there are other methods that you can have that abortion up until the day of birth. They just don't do it that way. You should understand that according to Roe v. Wade and the way the Constitution is interpreted by the Supreme Court, the only thing we can do in the states is regulate abortion's safety up until 20 weeks. And then after 20 weeks, we can totally stop it for various reasons, but there's ways around it. That's why you hear things like the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, everything starting at 20 weeks, because we can't do anything before then, other than the work that we do behind the scenes to change people's hearts and minds to reduce the need for abortion. But that particular method is illegal, but there's other just as horrendous ones that are taking place.
I'll just ask a real quick question, because I think in so many churches there's total agreement on everything you said until you get to the issue of rape, abuse, incest. I really think it's important to address that. Please.
Certainly. A child conceived in rape or incest is no different than anybody sitting here, other than the way that the conception took place. There are many people that say they're pro-life, and there are many states and many legislators that will pass a pro-life law, except if the woman has conceived a child except in rape or incest. We are 100% pro-life. It doesn't matter to me how that child was conceived, because it's still a human life. And why should that child have to pay for the sins of its father? It's no different than anyone else. But that is the bargaining chip that we have sometimes with our legislators. For instance, there's 2 pain-capable acts going on right now. There's one in the state of Ohio. Ohio is trying to stop abortions after 20 weeks because they say a child feels pain. That's just an excuse because we know we can't regulate it before 20 weeks, but we know that a child's nervous system develops around its 7th or 8th week, I believe, and a child feels pain much earlier, but we can regulate it at 20 weeks. In Ohio, there are no rape exceptions, but the National Pain Capable Act has rape exceptions in it. We didn't know when it was introduced, first of all, in January, and once we found out, 9 states immediately got on board to say, pull that act until that language is removed. And what the legislators told us is, there's not enough legislators to back it without rape exceptions. My answer is get rid of the legislators. We should know what these positions of these legislators are who say they're pro-life before we vote them into office. It's not easy. Nobody ever said any of this is going to be easy, and it's not that simple. But a child conceived in rape or incest, or one with fetal anomalies, one that's had a prenatal test, is no different. It is a life just like any one of us, and we shouldn't make exceptions for them.
Briefly, while I do agree wholeheartedly, I think from a church point of view, here is where a church community becomes extremely important. We need to build the kinds of networks that will support these women. Again, if we have a commitment to life, this commitment to life extends both to the unborn child, but also to the mother who is traumatized by this event, whose body is going to be changed forever by this event. And so I'm very careful that we don't say things too cavalierly, because this is a serious issue. And lastly, that we need to recognize that the solution to these issues are never going to be legislation. Now, legislation is important because we have this mindset that if it's legal, it's right. But we have to deconstruct that thing. We have to deconstruct in our culture to let people know just because the law says it's legal up to 20 weeks for any reason doesn't mean that it is right. We need to be at the forefront of those discussions. And I'll quit there.
Another question.
Can I just add one more thing to that?
Sure.
What he said is exactly right, and I'm glad he did say it. But I should tell you, first of all, that the trauma of a rape is very, very bad. But the trauma, adding a trauma of killing your child on top of it is even worse, because most women that have an abortion may not experience something today, tomorrow, but down the line, adding trauma to trauma is adding fuel to the fire. So that is one of the reasons we support that a woman who has a child conceived in rape, we don't say just have an abortion and get rid of it, because it doesn't get rid of the problem.
We have time for a few more questions. Michael.
I was thinking about the how to talk to non-Christians about abortion, and I've heard some of the studies about when abortion happens to a woman's body, how later on they develop cervical cancer and different things like that. Is there any more information that could help people make the right decision that are non-Christians with what could happen to their bodies later on in life because of the abortion that they had?
Yes, there is. A lot of, up until a few years ago, the American Cancer Society would debunk it and say there's no truth to it. But there's been worldwide studies show that the incidence of breast cancer in women post-abortion is on the rise. Now, breast cancer used to be a white woman's disease, they'd say. But the majority of abortions that are done in this country, the statistics show that, like in the state of Ohio, I think the black population is 8% of the population, but they have 40% of the abortions. And the corresponding rise in breast cancer rates among black women is astronomical in the study that's done, pointing to an increase in the breast cancer rate. The reason there is an increase in the rate of breast cancer after an abortion is purely biological. When you interrupt a pregnancy has certain changes that happen in women's body, in their breast tissue and everything. And when you stop that suddenly, you're not stopping that change the way it's supposed to be at the termination of a pregnancy through a live birth. It is stopping before that, and so there's changes in breast tissue that cause it more likely for a woman to have breast cancer, and there's lots of studies, and we have them posted on our website too.
at the same time, I do want to urge a person that position that it's not for, what's going to be the greatest benefit to you or the greatest harm to you, but this is life that we're talking about here, and we need to value life, whether it's going to make a difference, for us, positive or negative. That life has to be valued.
Another question. Ryan?
I have a backstory in my question. It was I was actually watching an episode of House, and on the episode, the lady was going to die or give birth. How do we make that choice as a Christian to choose her life over the baby's life?
That is difficult. I attended a presentation a few nights ago where Chris Spielman, maybe you might remember him, he was on the Cleveland Browns, he was on the Buffalo Bills, Detroit Lions, and Chris Spielman's wife died of cancer. And the cancer was brought on, she beat it 3 times. The first time was, I believe she was pregnant with her second child, and she experienced a miscarriage when the cancer developed. They beat that cancer, and she discovered she was pregnant again. The cancer came back. They beat it a 3rd time when she became pregnant, and they beat the cancer. And then about a year and a half after that, she was having pains, and they thought the cancer was back and discovered she was pregnant. One of the problems was that she was on a new drug that was not tested with pregnancy, and they weren't sure what could happen to the child. So her choices were abort the child, continue with the pregnancy while taking the drug, or take your chances and don't take the drug at all. And Chris said that his first thought was he was so in love with his wife, and he was the mother of his children, that he wanted to do everything he can to save her, and he wanted her to abort. But he never got the words out of his mouth because his Christian upbringing realized that he can't tell her that. He knows that the life of that child is more than anything, and that it was God's gift. So they decided, and she decided, of course, to continue with the pregnancy without taking the drug. And I sat there during that presentation in tears, hoping to God that I never had to make that decision on anything. But knowing that it's God's gift of life and we don't know what's going to happen afterwards, it's easy for me to say, because I'm not in the situation, that I wouldn't take the drug. But when I heard him talk about this and saw him crying through it, but realized that it was the God's gift of life, I just hope that I can support someone that's in that situation sometime. Those decisions are not made lightly, but it is a decision that in trying to save the life of that child. And Chris's wife did live 6 years beyond that pregnancy. They did beat it, and the cancer came back. So in that case, she did the right thing. So that might not be a clear-cut answer, but it's one that I know.
I wanted to respond. I think that those situations where it is either the baby or the mother, those are rare. And they tend to be used kind of like wedge issues, right? So they get a little point in, and then they're, okay, well, it's legal here or it's beneficial here, so we should make the whole thing, we just let the whole thing loose. But given a situation like that, again, I think we have to be compassionate and understanding and prayerful, and ultimately it's that family's choice. Because, again, we can pontificate from the outside and say, you should do this, but we don't know all the details, right? In one case, it may be good, may be right to, given the set of circumstances, it may be right to say, okay, the mother has the best chance of survival here. In another situation, it may be that, you know what, the baby has a better chance of survival here. And I think we have, again, I'm not so much in favor of making once and for all kinds of declarations. I think sometimes we have to dig into the weeds and figure out, okay, what are really the details here? And ultimately, it is those who are closest to the situation that can make the best decision.
Okay, Howard? This is going to be the last question, so you get to ask it.
You've also had a question from Nick for a while. His hand has been up.
Sorry?
Nick's hand has been up for quite a while.
Okay. It wasn't the same question you had with your wife. You have a different question? I don't know if I can give two to, well, I would give two to you, so go ahead.
In the life of a person who is pro-life and anti-euthanasia, is there room to be in favor of capital punishment?
I was a guest on a radio show a couple years ago where the host is very, very pro-life, but is very for capital punishment. And he said, when you're protecting life, you're talking about innocent human life. And he wanted me to say that I should support capital punishment, but you know what? I'm not God, and I'm not the judge and jury. No matter what the judge and the jury said, in my heart, I don't think there's room. I'm not up on the subject. I have to admit that we don't address it all that often, and it's not to be taken lightly. There aren't that many executions, I know, but in all good faith and honesty, I can't support it because I'm not the one that's judging, and I can't tell you if they're innocent or not.
This to me is a very serious issue because we don't often see the inconsistency in our positions. Capital punishment, especially as executed in this country, bad choice of words there, but the way we go about determining the use of capital punishment has often disturbed me because it is tilted or stilted towards the poor, the minorities, the mentally incapable. That's typical. Those are the people who typically are get capital, who receive a death sentence. It tells me something is wrong. It is not an equitable system. So if we are going to have a bias towards life, I think we need to take capital punishment off the table. Now, I'm not saying that there might not be some cases where this may be necessary, but I think we use it far, far, far too often. I was reading just yesterday of a man who was in death row for 30 years. 30 years. And one of the informants came up and said, "Oh, by the way, it really wasn't him." And the prosecutor actually confessed to the man that, yeah, I stacked the jury against you. And I did all these things to make sure that you were caught. You were condemned to death. I'm thinking, oh my goodness. See, again, if we're having a bias towards life, this bias towards life has to not just deal with the end and the beginning, it has to deal with all this stuff in between, which includes things like social and economic justice.
I like the way you asked the question, is there room for capital punishment? Biblically, we see examples of capital punishment. So is there room? Yes. The question is always, how do we apply what we find in Scripture to a new context? If we are in a system where we're finding that injustice is being done, that the wrong guy is being charged, that capital punishment is being used against a certain group, against the poor, against the African American, as opposed to the white. If there's inequality in the way it's being done, then yeah, it needs to be taken off the table, because if we can't do it right, then we should not be doing it. Is there room in some cultures somewhere where it can be done in a way that's faithful to God's honoring of life? I think that there is, but I don't see it right here, right now, today.
Okay, Nick, you are going to get the last question. All right.
We're talking about like legislation, we're talking about biblical and what we could say. But like us as Christians, what do? I see a huge gap between, we give a bunch of information, we do all this stuff of like telling people what they should do. But what do we do as Christians? Like, I think there's a huge gap between that. How do we be there for that person? How do we have compassion? Because when I see someone that's pregnant, they're in shock. They're not thinking legislation or biblical. Like, I've seen Christians go and get abortions when they're supposed to be Christians, but since they're in a situation, they just don't know what to do. They freak out. What could us as Christians do rather than say?
That's the biggest part of my job. I mean, people, when they think Right to Life, they think we're the people that are just out on the sidewalk with the signs, or that I'm at the State House. But that's not what the majority of my job is. And if you want to stay here till tomorrow morning, I will tell you everything that I do. But there is a lot you can be doing. From something just as simple as wearing my little feet pin I have on here. I never tell anybody what they are, but people will come up to me sometime and say, "Oh, that's cute. What are they?" So these little feet pin, these are the size of an infant or a fetus at 10 to 12 weeks when most abortions occur, and where they're telling you it's a blob of tissue, and they see that and they're shocked. And a little discussion ensues, and I usually end up giving them away. And so something as little as that to going into the schools, to witnessing at abortion clinics, because most of the time you're not going to save the life of the child that's on their way in to be aborted, but you have a big impact on the people driving by in the community. So there's tons of stuff to do. I invite you to visit our website, which is www.righttolifenortheastohio.com. Come to my office. We have lots of programs that can happen in churches as part of existing social justice committees. Volunteer at a pregnancy center. Volunteer with kids. I mean, there's tons of stuff to do. But like I said, if you want to go home today, I'm not going to go into it all. But as a Christian and as just as an American, there's tons of stuff to do, and we can help you with that.
I want to say value life. Do what Jesus did. Do what Peter did in Acts chapter 3. See people who don't see that they are valued, because we need to change the culture of America, not the political policy of America. I mean, that needs to be changed too, but primarily we need to change the culture of people, individuals, get us to a point where we value life. Show people that they matter. There's a big issue right now with Black Lives Matter. What is our response to that? There's one person being tried with murder right now because he shot an unarmed black man in the back 7 times as the man was running away from him. How do we talk to each other about this? Do we recognize these situations and not necessarily change political policy, but cry out and say the world is not seeing a specific population of people, or and this isn't just with the unborn, but suicide rates. Where who is it that's committing suicide? Are there people who are feeling unloved? What are we doing? Are we as the church embracing them? The youth in America today, what are we doing in the high schools, in places where we see someone who is a loner and depressed, and are we reaching out and giving them that hand? What about those of us who aren't as youthful anymore? What do we do when we see people on the streets? Do we push them away and say, I don't want someone on the streets here? Or do we find out who they are, show them that they are valued? And if we create a culture of valuing people, then abortion and suicide, euthanasia, all the cases are going to go down. It's a changing of the culture that needs to happen, and it starts with what's in our hearts. Who do we see? Who do we notice?
Very well said. Very, very well said. Just a quick anecdote. I believe it was either Iceland or Norway when I think it was last year or maybe a year before, where the police, in trying to apprehend someone, actually shot the person dead, and the person died. And the whole country was in mourning. How many people get shot and killed in our country? Not just by police officers, but by others. We have to accept that in America, we live in a culture where death is like, oh yeah, we got 300 million or so people, and what's one or two more? I refer you back to my statement that if we devalue one life, all of our lives are devalued.
We're going to conclude our service in this way. I'm going to ask our ushers in just a moment to come. We're going to take a special love offering for Denise. And if you are going to contribute to that, writing a check, write it to the church, Church of New Hope. And then we'll collect it all and give her a check before she leaves today. Now, before the ushers do come, I'm going to ask our panelists if they care to, maybe just a final 15-second or so, final word, summarization, if you care to, starting with Dr. Renee, then Dr. David, and then Denise to have the final word on that.
15 seconds.
There's 30.
That's 3 gone, right? I think we have to look at our ethical system. Some of us, we have an ethical system that tends towards the belief that something is right because it produces a right outcome. That's called a teleological ethical system. What I'm arguing for is a deontological system. Big word that just simply means that something is right just because it is. I think we have to start from a place. Life is right. Life is appropriate because it is.
That's all I have to say about that.
I concur.
Let's give a hand to our panelists today, shall we? I'm going to go ahead and give a prayer for the offering, and I'll also let this prayer be a dismissive prayer, but don't run off until the offering basket has come by you, and then you'll be free to be dismissed after the prayer and the offering, and then if you care to come and talk to the panelists afterwards, I'm sure they'll be happy to field some more questions as well. Let us pray. We thank you for our time of gathering. We thank you for the many words shared today from our panelists, from our guests, and from our congregation. We pray, Lord, that we may internalize these things and that we may be people who are transformed every moment of our lives to consider how do we value lives? How do we value the lives of others? From the unborn to those who are at the end of life. Help us to be people who are introspective about our own lives and to live our lives appropriately for Christ and for others as you call us to do as we think of these 2 great commandments, the love of God and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Bless now the offering. Bless Denise, her ministry, all those who are laboring in this venture of trying to protect life and change our nation. And we do pray for change in our nation, that we may be a church and a people who are about the Father's business in all manner of the call that you have given unto us. We thank you for this time together now. May Christ be glorified. Amen.